And welcome back to the Showrunner. It is great to have you here with us for episode number 110 of the Showrunner podcast. I am your host, Jared Morris, also the host of many, many other podcasts, the Assembly Call podcast on the Brink, Site Success, and some others probably sprinkled in there too that I'm forgetting. And of course, my co-host is Johnny Naster, host of Hack the Entrepreneur. Johnny, welcome. Excited to be back talking podcasting with you again, third week in a row.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's great.
It feels
good. Feels good to be back in the groove. Well, maybe we're not in the groove yet, but we're getting there. But the question on everybody's mind, because it's on my mind after we recorded the last one, was you have a different title or introduction.
I do.
Has this been discussed at all? Because I know people are wondering.
Oh, as in like, why am I no longer the VP of Marketing for Rainmaker Digital?
Yes.
So I guess I should explain that. I took on a different role there. Actually, when my wife went back to work 8-9 months ago, however long it was, I decided that it was a good time for me to step aside and step into the full-time care role for my daughter. And the timing worked out because I was kind of at a point where I wanted to pursue some of my own projects as well. And so, let them know that. And they were kind enough, wonderful enough to offer me kind of a reduced role and the ability to keep writing the site's weekly newsletter, to keep hosting the Site Success podcast. And so, to be able to stay part of the team that way. And it was a great opportunity because those are two things that I could do at night, in the mornings, whenever I had time, which, as anybody who has done full-time care for an infant and budding toddler knows, you never quite know when your free time is going to come. And so it was nice to be able to do that. So so I'm a little bit of a different role there now, more like a Studio Press ambassador. I guess if I had a title, that would probably be the title. So that's why the title is different, but the other shows are the same, Assembly Call, Podcast on the Brink. But just my role with Rainmaker Digital is different. So there's the quick explanation.
Thank you. That's cool. That's all we needed. It was just because it's abrupt. It's you always had the same title, and now you don't.
Yeah, it's cool. True.
My title always seems to change. So from maker of sandwiches and things like that, but yours was
see, that's how we know that we're not totally back in the groove yet, because we haven't come up with your new titles yet. Wearer of incredible t-shirts. We gotta get back to that.
True. All right, we
gotta get back to that. Okay, so you and I we were talking on Slack earlier today and kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about in this episode. And I think we both came to a similar realization at about the same time. And that realization was, we need to sit down and have a major talk about content strategy, because the whole, kind of waking up on Wednesday morning and figuring out what we're going to talk about, that's not really going to work long term. And it was pretty easy for these last couple of episodes because, we had a few topics, kind of ready that were natural transitions out of the hiatus into what we're doing now. But again, that's only going to work for a couple of episodes. So we both agreed that we have to sit down and really figure out what our strategy is going to be, because we wouldn't be leading by example if we weren't doing that. Because an episode that we produce today should really, be linked to a goal that we have a month, 3 months, 6 months from now. Otherwise, what's the purpose of this episode? Right. And so, on kind of a micro level, just getting on here, talking about our experience podcasting, giving tips, that's all well and good. But I think you and I both agree that a showrunner is thinking bigger and bigger than that, and in a way that is taking, each episode is leading to something and taking the audience somewhere, along with taking the business somewhere. And so we want to get back to that. And so that was our idea. One idea was just to come on here and have a very meta discussion about that. But fortunately, you put together a really great outline. And so I'm excited to see the directions that you want to take this episode.
Right. And then when I showed you the outline, you're like, oh, you took a different approach, which is cool because I agreed to 100% with what you said we have to kind of create the strategy around it. So I went to start creating an outline based around doing a meta discussion of that. And I realized we had to answer some questions first before we could. It seemed like we were jumping ahead, putting the cart before the proverbial horse, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it felt like we needed to do this. And so I thought, since we have to do this before we can make that next step, I thought that we should kind of go pull you behind the curtain and show you how and the questions we would answer to do this. And then you can go with the same thing for your show.
And by the way, if you're new to the showrunner, we try to do this as much as possible, which is peel back the curtain and kind of show you our work for, how we're doing and what we're doing. And I know, you kind of run the risk, I think, of doing that, being a show about podcasting. And on the one hand, you'd like to have everything buttoned up and perfect and, just totally polished when it publishes. But I think, Johnny, you and I found over the first 100 or so episodes that people kind of like the peel back the curtain episodes the most. And, showing us maybe in the midst of doing something that, I don't know, maybe in an ideal scenario, you're not showing to the public, but this is a show about podcasting. So I feel like we can do our best teaching by actually showing people how we really, do this stuff. Like if we were just kind of having a conversation on Slack by ourselves, what that might look like. I think that can be instructive. So that's why we try and do some episodes like this, where again, we do kind of peel back the curtain and show you some of the raw stuff that we do, to work on the show and to have the show move in the direction of our goals and your goals as well.
Right. And it might be interesting to do another, maybe not podcast episode, but video, maybe even a live on YouTube, showing how we're actually going to do this for the showrunner itself, but to put this sort of foundation, and then also the action of going through these exercises and answering these questions would turn into like a 2-hour, 3-hour episode. And that's not what we want to do to you out there listening. So this is podcast monetization, how to connect your content to your offers. So I understand that not everybody out there is creating a podcast necessarily for a business or for direct monetization in that way. And unfortunately, this isn't necessarily maybe for you. There's probably some stuff you can glean from this, but we are doing it based on the showrunner and sort of going that meta way. And so rather than, again, trying to cover way more than we can in one episode, we're going to it in this sense with the show that has a business behind it, or a business model that you're trying to create behind it. So with that,
and it's interesting, because you jumped from content strategy to podcast monetization, right? And I think I'm glad that you did that. And maybe, with the showrunner, kind of the terms that we've used, like authenticity, usefulness, sustainability, and profitability. If you don't have like a business plan linked to your show, if you don't know how you're going to make specific revenue yet, you can still think about it in terms of profitability, right? And when we talk about profitability, it's not just about money, but it's about what are you getting out of the time that you're putting into this. So even if you don't yet have a business model there, are you building an email list, or do you just have a lot of fun doing this? Are you looking to build a community? Are you looking to network? So even if the money part of this doesn't meet you at the place where you're at right now, try to think about it in your own way and apply it to what you are trying to get out of this show. Because it's not always money. There are kind of those intrinsic elements of profitability that you can hit too. And so you just may need to shift your thinking a little bit. But the reason, Johnny, why I like that you went with this monetization profitability idea is because if you're going to do an effective content strategy and figure out what content you need right now, you have to figure out where you want to go, not just where you want your business to go, but the journey that you want to take your audience on, what they need to learn, to get up to speed with where you want to take them later. And so if you don't think about it with the end in mind, you're still just going to kind of be walking around in the dark as you put this content strategy together. So I think it was a very smart approach that you took. And so even though I may have said in the beginning that you went in a totally different direction, it's become pretty clear that you went in the exact direction that we were talking about. You just approached it from the right way, which is start with the end in mind.
Right. And also this proves right here, and we will get into this, don't worry. We won't just keep going asides back and forth, but this is also why I think we make good co-hosts, because I think I'm pretty good at the sort of overarching big picture of these sorts of things. And then Jared sees that I gloss over many things and then likes to give the specifics for you.
It works. It works.
Okay. So how to connect your content to your offers. Again, this is thought of from the perspective of the showrunner. And I've got it into 3 sort of overarching sections that you need to look at. So the first one is your goals. The second one is their goals, meaning your audience. And then the third one is actually that connection of content to goals. With that in mind, the first one, your goals, the value your business provides. So this is where you are basically starting with the end in mind, as Jared said, which is clearly defining the goals for your podcast. This is, again, like the goal in this, the way we're talking about, isn't just to build an audience necessarily. It's ultimately taking it that you've built up that quote unquote audience, or at least attracted enough people. I mean, we discussed this a lot. You don't need a lot of people to support a business if it's like well defined and people are really into what you're offering. But you do need to define what it is after that happens, after you build that audience, what it is you're trying to accomplish with this. It's really hard to, I think, otherwise do it. You're kind of trying to do it backwards. So think with the end in mind. If when all of this works out how you want it to and the way you envision it, what does that look like? So I've got that as, that can be like a business or personal goal, I guess, if you're taking it from that perspective. It's probably going to be financial in a monetization sense, but it could also be expert positioning. I was having a hard time sort of putting that into words. So if you have a career, say, and you don't want to necessarily run quote unquote business around it, you could be doing this to get introduced to other people, or to just build up yourself as an expert in your marketplace, which can lead to better job opportunities, can lead to speaking opportunities and writing opportunities, or just meeting cool people within your marketplace.
You know what's interesting? More and more people that I talk to tell me that that's why they podcast.
I know.
And it's and I feel like that's shifted over the last year or two, actually. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's just the small sample size of people that I've talked to. But I've had a lot more conversations about using a podcast as a networking tool, even more than like a revenue generating tool, which tells me, I think, that people are being a little bit more realistic about the kind of revenue that you can make from a podcast, and smarter about how to leverage podcasts in other ways. So I'm glad you added that one, because I think more and more people are shifting to it, and it's a smart thing to use a podcast for.
Right. So clearly defining your goals before you get started.
And let me add one more thing too. When you talk about clearly defining your goals, is don't be intimidated if you can't define it clearly enough. Even if you're, like maybe you're at the beginning and you're like, well, shoot, I know I want to build a podcast audience and I want to generate revenue, but I don't know exactly what the business plan is yet. That's okay. Building the audience first is the smart way to go. So even if you don't know, like, I don't know what the product's going to be, I don't know what I'm going to sell to people, that's fine, because you can build an audience, listen, interact, and then figure out what the product will be. But you do want to at least know, I'm going to sell them something down the road, or I'm going to build a course, or I'm going to, do this. You should at least have kind of a vague idea for what the thing is that you will sell. And so maybe for you, clearly defining the goal is, I'm going to build an audience that is then going to be, kind of the asset around which I develop this business. That's still pretty clear, if you're in the beginning stages. So how clear your goal is going to be probably is going to depend a little bit on just where you are from the start, but don't be intimidated if you can't put together like this 12-month plan that looks perfect, that you can just do day by day by day. Like, it might be a little bit more nebulous than that, and you have to figure it out as you go. So just understand that when we talk about clearly defining your goal.
Right, exactly. And that goal is going to evolve. It's going to change. Before we started the showrunner, so 110 episodes ago, prior to that, the idea was to create a podcasting course, and then create a podcast around that could help promote and propel that course into sales and monetization. So we had that goal in mind as we were creating it. As we said, the whole reason why we're creating this show itself is because, or this podcast, like this episode itself, is because we are doing this again, meaning that it's evolving. The show has evolved, and what our goals are will evolve. Some of them will be the same. The course can be the same, and it doesn't even have to be, but this will always evolve. So exactly, Jared, this doesn't have to be, as I said, I'm the overarching kind of person. I don't sit down and write exact 12-month sort of plans on any of this, but it will give you sort of a map to be able to create your content and tie it together. So the next one you need to know with your goals is how do you plan to accomplish this, which is, to me, kind of getting into what Jared was saying, and it's making it easier on you right now. And this is the plan to accomplish them. This doesn't mean that you have to have it done, but you've probably seen somebody else with a podcast, some other content creator who has created some sort of monetization around their show, and you want to maybe emulate that. So there's a very rare chance, I think, that we're going to be creating something absolutely from scratch that has never been done before, some crazy monetization plan. You do need a plan for that if that's what you're planning to do. But otherwise, you're probably, if you're a business, you're probably looking to acquire customers. If you have software, you're looking to acquire customers or get people to sign up for trials. If it's financial and you are sort of a content business like the showrunner, then that could be courses, sponsors, coaching products, membership sites, any of those things. We've all seen these things hundreds, if not thousands of times. And again, you don't need to know, well, what exactly will my membership site be? You just have to have that feeling that like, that's what I want to be doing in 6 months from now. That's awesome. And that will in turn now let you go through the other two major steps, which is to tie that content together. That's all you need at this point. You don't necessarily, and then as you build that audience, which we've talked about so many times, you will be able to form a better, more concrete idea around that product or service based on the audience as you're building it. So you don't need it now, but you do need to know what the goal is and how you plan to accomplish it.
And I think there's a level of self-awareness, candor with yourself that's really important here to set yourself up for success, because you don't want to pretend that you have one goal, but your goal is really something else. Like, you don't want to pretend that this is just a passion project and you're going to be fine not making any money from it, if really deep down you know that you need to make money and that's a goal. I was talking with a guy a couple weeks back who runs a local podcast, and I was sharing my experience with the assembly call, going up and going to Bloomington and meeting with audience members, and just how deep down, part of the reason why I love doing the assembly call is because I know that show is meaningful to people who are meaningful to me. And because when we go to Bloomington, it's kind of cool to be stopped by people who recognize you and are like, hey, I really love the assembly call. Thank you so much for doing it. Like that, there is a certain element there that makes me feel good and makes the show worth it. Now, the show still makes revenue and fulfills some of these other goals, but that's a part of it. And I think it's important to understand that he was saying the same thing, that part of the reason he loves doing his, local show is, they figured out some ways to monetize it, and it, kind of helps with networking, but also it's kind of cool being the guy who does that show that people come up to and, have kind words about, and, gives him a little bit of authority, a little bit of stature. And it's okay if that is one of the goals that you have for the show. I just think it's really important to be honest with yourself about why you're doing it and about what your goals really are. And there may be a few of them mixed in there together, but just don't try to pretend that the show is not for money if you want to make money. And don't try to pretend that, building up your personal brand or your authority in an area isn't a goal if it really is. Because if you're not being clear-eyed with your goals and honest with yourself about them, you're going to move in a direction that's different. And a year down the road, you may wake up and say, well, shoot, I've been doing the show, but I haven't really ended up where I want to be. Well, part of that reason may be because you didn't give yourself an honest assessment of where you really want to go with it. So just make sure that you're being honest about what those goals are.
Right. And I guess the other thing with this is not specifics of it, but you can go through this entire process for different offerings. So different products, different services. You can have the same goal, which could be financial, but as you'll see in the next step is that, like Jared and I will have reasons to have maybe two different ways of accomplishing the same goal, which could be financial. And that'll make sense shortly, but just know that we're not trying to just say, okay, well, I want to do coaching products, membership, all this stuff, because there is a different approach to all of those. And so you're doing it for each one sort of individually, and then you'll craft content to connect to that end result. So the last one is to know what your value proposition is. So really, it's how you plan to accomplish the goal and sort of how, like, what makes you unique and valuable to your potential audience members. So the showrunner, I don't want to screw this up, but it's the showrunner help people create a remarkable audience experience and become showrunners. It's something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we've discussed this as well. When we were starting the show, there was other podcasts. There are plenty of podcasts about podcasting, and they all have their own unique approach to it. And we wanted to take our sort of approach to it, which was creating that remarkable experience. moving beyond just podcasting and moving to show running as the showrunner itself, and then also building that audience experience via content, via, I guess, audio-based content. And so that fit us into where we were, and we positioned that as our value proposition. So we stood out in the marketplace. We knew what the value was. We knew what our goal was. We knew how to accomplish it. And then we positioned ourselves with that so that it made sense to our audience moving forward.
Yeah, we wanted people to take a bigger, broader view of what a podcast can be, not just a series of audio episodes, one followed by another, but a show, and think about it in those terms. And you know, with maybe a little bit less emphasis on the technical side of it and a little more emphasis on the mindset and the inspiration and that part of it, drawing on our experience. I think all those things mixed in together are the value proposition that we provide. And having a good understanding of that is important, because you have to be able to position yourself against your competition out there. And your audience needs to know what they're here for and what they're not here for. And, you probably want to repel some people who might listen to your show. That's okay, because that way the people who really do like you are going to lean in even more, because they can really connect with what you're doing. But it's important to understand what those things are.
So that wraps up the first step, which is your goals, the value your business provides. And it brings us to the second step, which is their goals, what your audience cares about. We've spent a lot of time, and within the course, one of the very first things is understanding your audience of one. And so, as I alluded to in the previous one, where you will go through this process for each individual offering that you want and each way that you're planning to accomplish your goals that you've set. This is how, and I think why Jared and I need to reevaluate how we do this, because when we started, we had the goal of selling the course. The course was created at that point for people who hadn't started a podcast and wanted to create that remarkable audience experience. As we've evolved as a show, 110 episodes in, and as your show evolves or matures, you're going to build an audience potentially of more than one type. It's just sort of the nature of it, and people will relate to different things that you are teaching or talking about, educating or entertaining on your show. And so we have now at this point, and that's because we've sort of varied our content into different places, but it makes it hard when you're just trying to, okay, it's Wednesday, let's create another show. And this is kind of where the thing started, was where we talked about that today. And I was like, well, I don't know if we're talking to the beginners or if we're talking to the showrunners who have 50 plus episodes at this time. Two different people. Yes, they can both be into us as the hosts. They can both be into our show. They can be into our style. They can be into our value proposition, but they want to know different things. So that is the showrunner as the example. And you might have one, because you might be still starting out as your show, like one audience member that you can pinpoint. There might be two or three, depending on which market you're into, and how that process has gone. And obviously there's going to be individuals within our audience that maybe don't exactly fit into these categories, but we can only, as showrunners, you can only vary this so much, because it just, you just have to kind of move on with creating the content. So we have showrunners as having two different types of listeners. That beginner, the beginners want to know what is ... What is podcasting? What is artwork? What is a podcast distribution channel? And then they also want to know how to do, right? So how do I create my artwork? How do I create a value proposition? All those types of things are for the beginners, and they want to know it. The good thing about this is that the second one is showrunners. So people who have a mature show, or maybe are on their second or third shows already. They want to know, how do I do blank, blank, blank better? So if we were talking about branding and telling beginners what it is and how to brand your show, showrunners now want to know, I'm at episode 45. I want to reevaluate how I branded my show and step up my game maybe. I want to go to the next level. I want to know how to do blank, blank, blank better. The cool thing about this, and if you want to try and position yourself with two audiences in mind, is that beginners oftentimes still want to listen to the how do I do things better, because it allows us sort of to picture ourselves there, and it can motivate us to take the effort to get through those first 40 or 50 episodes to get there. And that's awesome. And so the content won't necessarily be tied to them, but it still is sort of enthralling to them, and they will be entertained and educated by it. And all that stuff will make more sense when they actually get to that stage.
But this is really important to think about because, John, as you mentioned, if you have a new show right now, if you're coming to listening to these showrunner episodes, you're a beginning podcaster, chances are you're talking to one very specific audience. You should be. That's how you're going to build a connection with that audience and grow. If, as Johnny said, if you're you have a more mature show, you may now have evolved into talking to multiple different audiences at once. And it's very important to not ignore one of those audiences. So, Johnny, one of the things that my wife and I do at dinner, have you ever heard of Ask Amy?
Yes.
She's like an advice columnist. And so we have dinner and we pop out these Ask Amy columns and we read them to each other, and then we kind of talk about them back and forth. It's a really interesting way to like find out how we feel about things because we're like, we read about these people asking for advice and then kind of, say what we would say to them. And so last night we were reading one, and it was about this lady who worked in an office dominated by men. And there were, only two other women that work at their office. And so, this guy who would send out a lot of emails would always address them as gentlemen. And she was asking Amy, like, what do I do being a woman in this office where this email is being addressed just to gentlemen and I feel left out? I'm not sure if it's meant for me. I don't, or if it's just kind of ignoring me or if it's disrespectful to me. And so she was asking for advice. And I feel like if you do have a couple of different audiences and you're really talking, strongly to one of them and ignoring the other one, they may kind of feel like that. They may feel left out. They may feel left behind. And they may not be sure if this show is really for them anymore. And so, this is where, Johnny, I think it'll be interesting how we figure out how to address this, because we do want to still target beginners, but we also don't want to just do beginning content, because now the people who have been with us for 110 episodes and are further along, they want stuff too. And so I think it'll be interesting for each episode to know who we're talking to and to have an offer for the other person. So for instance, if we're going to talk about, how do I conduct interviews better, right? So we're talking to more the showrunners, the people who have mature shows. We should probably have maybe some kind of free 7-part email course for the beginners. Or, we already have the ebook, what's it called again? The Beginner's Guide to Launching a Remarkable Podcast. So on that episode, we should direct people, hey, by the way, if you're a beginner, if you haven't even started doing interviews yet, no problem. The showrunner is still for you. Go download our guide, The Beginner's Guide to Launching a Remarkable Podcast. That'll get you going, get you up to speed. But at the same time, if we decide to go back and do maybe a 5-episode series on, how to come up with your name and brand your podcast, which totally would be fair game because these are topics that are worth revisiting, but people are, for the people who are already satisfied with their name, we don't want to leave them out. Hey, go check out, go to XYZ URL, sign up for our How to Conduct Better Interviews course to get better at your interviews. So that way, people know that you haven't forgotten about them, even if this particular episode is geared towards somebody else. So that is something, and obviously for this, I'm talking to the showrunners with the more experienced shows who may have multiple audiences. Just be mindful of the fact that people who really like you may be listening, and you don't want them to feel left out. So always remember who you're talking to, and as your show gets a little bit bigger, you may be talking to more than one person per episode. Your focus may be in one area, but other people may be listening, and don't leave those folks out.
Right. And to wrap up this step, the second step is to answer, what are your listeners' goals, desires, wants, needs? Meaning essentially, like, what do they care about? So there's your goals at the very beginning, what you're trying to accomplish. And now at the end of the second step, it's what do they care about as your audience? Whether that's one listener or two, you have an audience of one or an audience of 5. That doesn't matter. You need to know either for each one of them or for just the individual, if you're starting, is what do they care about? Everything kind of stems from there, which takes it. Well,
Well, I wanted to say, when you first started talking about number two, my first thought was, do we have these flipped? Should number two be number one? Should we think about the audience first and their goals before we think about our goals? I will say, here's what I think. You tell me if you agree, Johnny, but I think if you have a more mature show, so you've already spent time very focused on the audience, and building up this audience. And now you've got a business built around it. I do think it's totally fair game and probably smart to start with your goals and figure out, answer some of those business questions that we answered earlier, and then go on to the goals of your audience. But I think if you are starting out, if you are new to this, I do think you would want those to be flipped. And I think you would want to think about the audience first and think about who you're talking to, what their goals are, what their desires are. Because if you're not starting there, then thinking about your own goals and trying to put it into a business context, you're not going to be thinking about it clearly, or you're going to be doing it with an incomplete understanding of your audience and maybe moving in a direction, developing a product, developing a solution that isn't really the right one. So I think once you have some success and you really know your audience and you've got, a business going, then I think you can go with this order of 1 and 2. But I think if you're starting out, flipping it and really starting with your audience is the better way to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, hopefully that was clear. It was true. Like, we were taking this from the perspective of a show with 110 episodes, and monetization behind it already, but trying to reevaluate how to move forward now with this awareness of our two different listener groups.
Yeah.
Which leads us into the third and final step, which is the connection of content to goals. So here's the way I picture it. Here's the way I want you to picture it. You too, Jared. So to picture a Venn diagram, right? The two circles with the overlap in the middle. And there's the two circles. The first circle is topic. So what your audience cares about, which we answered in part 2 just previously. And then the second circle on the right is content. This is what we're trying to create, hence the value that you provide. Now move those two slightly together so there's an overlap in the middle that's quite small, actually, but that overlap in the middle of these circles is what you need to cover with your content moving forward. And now here's sort of a way to look at it, right? You need to create content that connects the dots between what your listeners care about and what you have to offer them. This is, I'm going to say, in contrast to, I think, how we often do it. And I think we've fell into this sort of in some previous episodes and that's why it became so apparent that we needed to do this whole exercise, Jared, is because I think oftentimes we create that content based on similar or just like parallel topics to our audience, right? So as long as we're talking about podcasting or some sort of show running or creating content, that it's of value to our listeners. And it is, because it can build listeners and audience and all that stuff. But at this stage, we're not talking about building audience. We're talking about monetization is the goal of this exercise for us. And so we're not looking for content based on similar parallel content to build more audience, because that'll just ultimately fail with our ultimate goal, which is monetization through, as we talked about at the beginning, was the Showrunner podcasting course. So we spent quite a few episodes sort of just covering podcasting as a general. It was good for the audience. You guys get great content out of it. You learn things, but it wasn't tied on our end directly enough to that end result. So you always need to create the content that connects the dots between what your listeners care about, what we answered in number 2, and then back to number 1, which is what we care about, which is our goals. Obviously, we care about our audience too, but in this exercise, we care about 100% about our goal that we defined in the first step.
Well, and here's, I think this is an important point to make, is one way to care about your audience is to care about your goals. Because the thing that will happen is if you ignore your goals and you just try and say, like if we got on here and we just continued down the road that we had been on, Johnny, just kind of covering podcasting topics, but not tying them back enough to the business goals that we have, what's going to happen to the showrunner? The showrunner is going to end up petering out because, you and I don't have endless time. As much as we love talking about podcasting, and we do, this still has to serve a business purpose. This has to achieve those goals, or else we're not going to be able to do it anymore. And then the show goes away, and that's no good for anybody. So it's not always a totally selfish exercise to think about your business goals and think about what it's going to take to sustain your show. Because if you're not totally candid with yourself about what that will take, and then if you don't take the time to plan it out, then 10 episodes down the road, you may be like, all right, well, I mean, I'm not getting anything out of this. This isn't going where I thought it was. And now the show's not there anymore. And who is that good for? Nobody. So, I know sometimes we like to have, kind of a purist mentality about content. You've just got to be enthusiastic about the content and have a genuine love for the content. And you do, but that's only a part of it. You've also got to be getting out of it what you need to get out of it, which goes back to number one, where we talk about those business goals. So I think what you explain here, Johnny, is a great way to explain it. And I think it's absolutely necessary if you want to nurture a show that is going to go for the long term, and that is going to build an audience that is going to last for the long term.
And to get meta, you and I, Jared, as the hosts of this show, you out there listening as a listener of this show, are probably thinking back to somewhere showrunner episode 107, 108, 109, and now 110, not 1010, and the 6 or 7 month span between some of those episodes. I think this is why we've come to the realization why we have to do this. Because as much as we love it, as much as we love the content, and as much as we love podcasting, which is obvious because we podcast a lot, both of us, beyond the showrunner itself, is we had lost focus, I think, on that aspect of the business. And it just reached a point where other things took over the focus too much because they had this focus on our goals. And there's a certain point, I mean, we're all adults here and we all have goals, whether they're business, we only have so much time, and we do have to do things and provide for people and families and ourselves in ways that if this ties into that, it will get overshadowed greatly if other things are doing that providing in ways. So that's why I really do think this is why this happened. And I think that everybody participating here, listening or speaking, can admit that I think this did happen to us. And it's not going to happen to us again because of this exercise that I hope that you go through as well. So let's wrap it up with just going through them quickly. How to connect your content to your offers. You start with your goals, that value your business provides, which is clearly defining your goals and how you're going to accomplish them, and then what that value proposition is with the goal in mind. The second one is their goals. What does your audience care about? Whether that's an audience of 1 or an audience of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, depending on the maturity of your show. And then what are your listeners' goals, desires? Really, truly, what do they care about? What are their goals? Your goals, now their goals. And then finally, you're going to connect that content to the goals. Think of that Venn diagram again with the topic on one side, content on the other side. Overlap them slightly in the middle, and that's where it lies. It's not the similar or parallel topics. It's specific content that connects the dots between what your listeners want and care about and what you have to offer them to meet your goals.
Absolutely. Love it, Johnny. Thank you all for being here for this episode. Check us out at showrunner.fm. That is the website. As we record this, we are still working on updating the website, kind of putting the finishing touches on it. So depending on when you listen to this, I don't know if the website will be done or not, but go check that out. We have a lot of things planned for the future. Obviously, the first thing that Johnny and I are going to do is go through this exercise ourselves, figure out our content strategy moving forward. But we've already had a lot of really interesting conversations about what we want to do for community and, what we want to do in terms of some other smaller, really focused courses in addition to the big course. So we got a lot of things that we're excited about. We're really happy to be back, talking. I love having this on my calendar again, a weekly spot to talk about podcasting, to talk about being a showrunner, because I really missed it. And that's the real shame of not clearly understanding these goals so that you can put a content strategy together, is you end up not participating in a show that you really, really like just because you don't have a clear understanding of what that next step is, and it's not tied to goals clearly enough in a way that it's helping you achieve them. And that's a shame, because there's a lot of shows that need to be out there and connections between hosts and audience that need to be made, but they've got to have that through line, like what Johnny talked about today in this episode. So we're excited to do this for the showrunner and kind of show you our work along the way. And then as we go, we're excited to open it up and start to learn more about your journeys and give you opportunities to ask us questions and be able to help you along as you go too. Anything else, Johnny?
We're still broadcasting these live on YouTube.
Yes.
As we record them for the podcast. So this is, I believe, the third episode in a row. We've yet to tell you where you can find us live and when. But that's gonna change in the future. But know that we haven't totally forgotten about that. We are doing this live. This is getting published to YouTube. It's just secret and nobody knows that it's going there yet, as we sort of work out the technical sides of what we're trying to do. But in the very near future, you will be able to join us live if you would like, and then maybe stick around after for a few minutes and we can answer some questions, talk about Q&A. Some stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. All right.
It's been fun, man.
It has been. Thank you for being here, and we will talk to you next week on another brand new episode of The Showrunner.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Good stuff, man.
That was fun.
That was fun. We are still live on YouTube, but otherwise we're good. Let me save this.
If we could get this, we can't. We haven't even launched episode 107 yet, or 108.
108 is on our Spreaker feed. Like, it's sitting out there. So it'll pop in to YouTube or to iTunes, I guess, at some point.
Okay. As soon as they approve us.
I just got an email that we were approved.
Really?
I think so. Let me look. And I can forward it to you. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we got approved.
Because I'm dealing with support, and they're like, "We'll let you know when it's."
Well, I got
your email.
I got something. I think maybe my email is on the feed. iTunes Store podcast approved notification. Your podcast, you should expect to see on the iTunes Store within the next few hours. When it's available, it will be here. Showrunner, a podcast about podcasting by Jared Morris and Johnny Nastor. There it is.
Really? Can I see a link? Because I looked for it a couple hours ago, but
I
saw the old one.
I think this is the new one. It's got the new title and everything.
It doesn't have Rainmaker.fm. The one I saw had Rainmaker.fm.
Yeah, this doesn't have that. Copyright the Showrunner.
Did you email it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I put it in the Google Hangout chat.
Oh, Slack would be cool.
Let me put it in the Slack chat.
I don't know how to find the chat.
I know. Once I'm in Google Hangout, we use the chat constantly when we're doing our show.
Makes sense.
So I'm always just popping things over in the chat. Yeah, episode 108 is already in there too.
Cool.
I'll get the lesson page up for that.
So are we?
We are in. Man, we got to get all new ratings and reviews though.
So we don't have there's nobody subscribed to our feed then, right?
Oh shoot.
We lose that old feed?
Wait a minute. That's not right. You're just supposed to. It's not a new show.
I know. I was thinking.
You're just supposed to get ownership of it in Apple Podcasts, and then we change the feed URL. Yeah, it's not supposed to be a brand new show.
So I was thinking of that today. Let's see. iTunes.
That's lame.
Request ownership of podcast. That was the original. Following, let you know. Request an update.
Is the old Showrunner still in there?
It was as of a couple hours ago. I just looked. I saw the Rainmaker FM underneath of it, and it's still right here.
We don't want two Showrunners in there,
right? This one's still in here. So what did they say? So we appreciate you updating the feed to include your email address, blah, 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 transfer management, insert this digit. Okay, so that you did that a long time ago. I would like to request ownership of this. I believe the current ownership process. Oh, that was you.
Yeah.
I apologize for the delay. Your podcast has been updated with the Apple ID jnaster@gmail.com. Please allow 24 hours. That was March 20th, which then sort of made sense. And then
Have you looked in Apple Pod and Podcast Connect to see if it's
yeah,
in there?
so that's so I responded back to them last week because I went to do I was waiting for it to show up, and then I was like, oh great, the podcast is now displayed in my Podcast Connect analytics, sort of like there was a blank
Oh
thing
yeah,
for it
that's right.
there, but it wasn't listed under my podcasts. So I said, do I need to manually add it again? And he's like, yep, or she, that is correct. As the podcast is under the artist page Rainmaker FM. So then I resubmitted it yesterday as a brand new show under my podcast Connect, which is the Jane Astor, which is what it was supposed to be moved to. And now there's two of them.
That's not right. I guess maybe send him an email and let him know. That's lame.
Yeah, because the whole
We're,
point
we're gonna
is
have, but we're still live on YouTube, by the way, for anybody who's if anybody's still watching. But we need to do an episode about this though.
okay.
No one we have 0 viewers right now because we didn't tell anybody where they could find
Okay,
us.
that's cool. Okay, so I got to send them the link to the two shows. We want the feed to go from the old to the new. We want the reviews to go from the old to new. We just want ownership of this show.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yep.
Nothing else. It shouldn't be that hard.
No, it shouldn't be that hard. All we just need showrunner. We just need the showrunner in your Podcast Connect account, and then we will update the feed.
And then I need to delete the new one probably because
yes, and then delete that new one.
Okay, I'm going to keep it for now, obviously, because that way I can show them a new one they told me to create and an old one.
Yep.
And they're the same.
Yeah.
All right, man. I'm going to email them right now.
Okay.
But let's find time as soon as you can to do this part of this exercise.
Agreed. Okay. I'll shoot you an email and we'll get some times together.
Or if you just even want to go through and like put some of your ideas down. The way I'm thinking about it is we need just a plan for each of the two people. The one, we'll start with the beginners because it's the course. We have the course created. So let's start a content plan for the course sales.
Yep.
And then let's think of if we want to do coaching or something further beyond that for the other people and create a plan around that.
Agreed.
Okay.
Cool, man. And send me over your individual recording too.
Sending it right away.
All right, cool.
Okay, take care.
See you, man. See you, everybody.